Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, good evening, depending on where you're calling in from. Incredible group gathered here today, and the webinar that you're here for is How Can Trump Accounts Build Wealth for Low and Moderate Income Households? Uh, my name's Ida Rademacher. I'm a Vice President and the Co-Executive Director of the Financial Security Program here at the Aspen Institute, and we're co-hosting this webinar with the Urban Institute. And that's entirely fitting uh, to do this today with Urban. And because the work for both of our organizations goes back so far in this space, and Signamary goes back even farther, in some ways with work we've done together, I actually took a moment to go into the archives in the flurry of news this week from philanthropists, from Congress, from others around kind of additional investments in and commitments to Trump accounts. I wanted to go back and see where Aspen and Urban first started collaborating on the research and policy ideas about creating an integrated, inclusive, lifelong saving system starting from birth. And the answer is over 2 decades ago. When Lisa Mensa, who launched the Initiative on Financial Security at the Aspen Institute, one of her closest collaborators was Jean Sterling, who is at the Urban Institute and was one of the advisors on the initial seed of a program that became the Financial Security Program at Aspen. And that collaborative spirit between us persists today. We continue to value the ways that Urban's deep research and expertise helps us rigorously assess policy ideas that both have potential to negatively and positively impact the financial lives of low wealth and low income households. Um, Today we're going to be talking a lot about the potential for those positive impacts, and you'll have a lot of chances to hear and ask questions about those things. But I also want to recognize that the topic we'll be discussing today, Trump accounts, which are increasingly being referred to as 530A accounts in reference to the section of the One Big Beautiful Bill, HR 1, where they were introduced. We're excited to talk about how they could meaningfully serve as this down payment and boost to children's financial futures, how they're a step toward that widespread ownership economy and ownership investing that we are increasingly talking about. But we also recognize that, and for many of the people on this call who serve households directly, that this part of the overall bill does stand in contrast to other elements of the same piece of legislation that have the ability to exacerbate financial insecurity for those same households. We recognize this tension. We deal with that in many other elements of our work and our programming. But we feel it's our responsibility today to unpack and assess the potential of 530A accounts, Trump accounts on their own merits. And that's what we're excited about. I'm going to do a quick bit of housekeeping, which is we have 2 whole hours together today. I hope you stay for all of it. There's 3 different segments of that conversation that are going to really help touch all sides of the opportunity that we're all assessing at the moment and thinking about our roles in it. So after I introduce and step out of the camera, Signamary McKernan from the Urban Institute, she's going to be talking with Benita Melton from the Charles Sturt Mott Foundation, with Ray Boshara, who's a senior fellow here at the Aspen Financial Security Program, and also with Washington University with the work that they have been leading for so long on children's savings. They're going to talk about Trump Accounts 101, some of the history, comparing this to other wealth building programs and policies in the field. And then we'll have the privilege of having a conversation between Matt Lira, who we're excited to have here today with us. He's the executive director of Invest America, which is the org that's been leading a lot of the charge for these Invest America / Trump accounts / 530A accounts. He's going to be in conversation with Jason Ewas from the team here, the Inclusive Savings and Investing team here at Aspen. And the third segment is going to be moderated by Urban Institute's Madeline Brown, which is great. There's going to be opportunities in each of those segments for you all to join in with Q&A, and you'll see in your screen a place to add in those questions and answers. We'll be moderating that on the background, so we'll try to bring those into the conversation. And I already know that there's going to be a lot of questions that remain, but hopefully we'll have the time between that and the conversations that Benita has later on with Jill Hawley of Gary Community Ventures and Amit Kandouri of the Georgia Resilience and Opportunity Fund, the GROW Fund, to think about the role of philanthropy, which is looming large today, and what that can do in along with the private sector in really helping these accounts potentially meet their potential. And lastly, speaking of philanthropy, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Financial Security Programs funders for all of the work we've been able to do on early wealth building accounts. Thank you so much to the Annie E. Casey Foundation, to the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, and to the BlackRock Social Impact Foundation. With that, let me hand it over to a longtime friend and colleague, an incredible researcher, Signa Mary McKernan of the Urban Institute. And thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. Signa Mary?
Thank you, Ida. It's great to be together again. So we've had something of an economic conundrum for a while now. On the one hand, consistent GDP growth since 2022, stock market increases, inflation down to around 3% after pandemic highs, and yet the overwhelming economic experience for most average Americans is a sense of unaffordability and inability to get ahead. Some data are suggesting a K-shaped economy where people at the lower end and the middle end of income and wealth and are struggling, and people at the higher end are feeling good and spending. Regardless of what the data say, how most Americans feel about the economy is clear. Affordability has become one of the defining challenges of our time. Too many households are living paycheck to paycheck with limited ability to build wealth and live the American dream through home ownership, small business ownership, stock ownership, or higher education or training. And the consequences are that everyday Americans are losing trust in our economy and in our institutions. And this is why we're focusing on low and moderate income families for this event. Early wealth building accounts like child savings accounts, baby bonds, and now Trump accounts, if implemented well, hold tremendous promise to build wealth and help restore the American dream. As Ida said, many in financial services have taken to calling Trump accounts by their tax code name, 530As, and I'll use that term to refer to them today. You're probably familiar with it for other products like 529s and 401Ks. Yes, there's a whole alphabetic soup on financial accounts. So Ida and I have been working together on how to include low and moderate income families in wealth building for decades, as she said. And it seems like just yesterday that the two of us with other co-authors wrote a paper on matched savings accounts, a predecessor to early wealth building accounts. But when I looked back, it was published 15 years ago in 2010. I'm excited to hear from many experts today about how 530As can build wealth for low and moderate income households so that all Americans can participate in them. Before I turn it over to our first panel, I'd like to thank the Annie Casey Foundation, who generously funded this event. We're grateful to them and all our funders who make events like this possible. And the views that you're going to hear today from the speakers should not be attributed to the Aspen Institute, the Urban Institute, or our funders, including the Annie Casey Foundation. So now I'd like to welcome Benita Melton from the Mott Foundation to moderate this panel on Trump Accounts 101, what we know about Trump accounts and how they compare to existing wealth building policies and programs. Benita has been working on strategies to help low and moderate income families save money and build wealth for decades. Welcome, Benita.
Thank you very much, Signa Mary. And as Signa Mary noted, the Mott Foundation, we're based in Flint, Michigan. We are a local national and international philanthropy that works across 4 programs: Flint, civil society, environment, and the education program, which I lead. And the foundation has been developing and promoting and working to mainstream this idea of match savings and early wealth accounts for nearly 3 decades. And when I think about where we are now compared to where we started, I'm honestly quite a bit awed and humbled to be here today discussing Trump accounts or 530A accounts and how they might expand economic opportunity and educational opportunities for children and families. I'm also excited and honored to be having this conversation with Ray and Signa Mary. You can find their full bios on the event page, but please just let me say a few words. I'll start with Ray. I've had the privilege of working with him for nearly 30 years. He taught me the core concepts behind this work and why they matter. So he's a couple years older than me in CSA years. Besides raising program officers, he's one of the most brilliant policy entrepreneurs I've ever met. He has developed and championed this idea across multiple organizations, Corporation for Enterprise Development, which is now Prosperity Now. That's where I first met him. The New America Foundation, the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, former Senator Bob Casey's office, and now the Aspen Institute and the Center for Social Development at Washington University. Ray's steady presence in this field has truly been an asset, and I believe a good part of the reason we're where we are. I've also known Signa Mary for about 20 plus years. She's an economist by training, and as Ida noted earlier, she's an amazing researcher. She's published numerous reports and briefs on wealth building strategies, particularly how they impact low-income families. And she co-edited a book on asset building and low-income families with Dr. Michael Sheridan, who many of us know wrote the book Assets and the Poor, which sort of launched the children's savings account field. So with that, let's get into it. And Ray, I would like to start with you. Let's go straight to the basics. What are Trump accounts? And Ida, in her opening, mentioned children's savings accounts, and Signa Mary mentioned baby bonds. Compare and contrast those for us, Ray.
Thank you, Benita. And it's great to share a stage with Signa Mary and you, Benita, and to work together over several decades. And Benita, I am quite sure this field would not exist without your leadership and your investments. So we all appreciate everything you've done to make this moment possible. Thank you. So I like to think about Trump accounts as a down payment on a big idea that can and should be improved over time. All right. The best way to think about a Trump account, 530A account, is as a traditional IRA with special rules before age 18. Okay. Those special rules have one goal in mind, which is growth, economic growth, the growth of the account, right? And Treasury has actually started to call that period from 0 to 18 the growth period. They achieve that in 3 ways, that growth. First, no withdrawals whatsoever from the account until age 18. Maybe some rollovers, very limited, but no withdrawals. Secondly, funds are invested in capital markets. Especially things like broad indexes like the S&P 500. And third, the Trump accounts specifically encourage multiple investors in a child's future. families, government, states, localities, nonprofits, foundations, a whole range of folks can invest. Those three strategies are all aimed to ensure that the account grows as much as possible and kids have what the Aspen Institute calls startup capital or investable sums as young adults. All right. So with that definition, let's pull up the first slide. Benita asked me to do a very brief comparison of children's savings accounts, CSAs, baby bonds, and Trump accounts. I've learned in many presentations that a lot of folks kind of blur them together. They think of baby bonds generically, when for at least folks in the field here, we think about them as very distinct strategies. So it might be helpful just to say a little bit about them very briefly. So let's start with child savings accounts. Those were proposed by my colleague and longtime friend, Michael Sheridan, who published Assets in the Poor in 1991. The purpose was to put the whole wealth building for the poor on the table along with income support. It was a radical idea in the early 90s, and the goal remains to build wealth for those who have none, right? There's about 8 million accounts around the US, probably more at this point, given the growth of some of the statewide policies in Maine, in Pennsylvania, and California, along with citywide policies in New York, San Francisco, and elsewhere. They tend to be universal. The 95% of CSAs are on the 529 college savings platform, and so CSAs became college savings accounts. So people use them interchangeably, but because they're on that platform, they're mostly about college attainment and success. Deposits tend to be in the $50 to $100, $500 range, so a little on the modest side, but they do encourage multiple investors in the account. The vast majority of research we have, including CEDOK and other great research, comes from the CSA's field, and I don't think we'd be where we are without that evidence. And there have been national bills, including the one that I worked on for Senator Casey called 401 Kids, which would have expanded CSAs on the 529 platform. Next would be baby bonds, which I'm sure many of you know were proposed by Derek Hamilton and Sandy Darity in 2010. It has a very explicit goal of reducing the racial wealth gap, although technically all low wealth families would benefit from a baby bond. We don't have very many baby bonds, maybe a few thousand, maybe it'll be tens of thousands in a few years as these pilots and statewide policies take off. 5 states have passed baby bond legislation. There's 16 states with proposals, another 10 pilots around the country. They are not built on 529 platforms overwhelmingly. That's because they want to offer more uses than post-secondary education, and they tend to be means tested. For example, for families that are eligible for Medicaid. They generally do not allow families and others to contribute, but are purely a government investment. And there's not a lot of evaluations, but there's a lot of modeling suggesting the promise of baby bonds to reduce the racial wealth gap. And of course, Senator Booker has had a bill for many years to expand them nationwide. And then that brings us to Trump accounts, which were enacted in July of 2025, led by Invest America. We're fortunate to have Matt Lira with us to say more about that. And the goal here is different than, in many ways, than CSAs and baby bonds. It's really to bring all Americans into the stock market, into capital markets, which is really kind of a radical idea for folks who've been working on building wealth for the bottom half. This is a fairly radical idea, and I happen to think a very promising one. I'm not going to say more about Trump accounts because we're going to go to the next slide, which is called Follow the Money. And Benita has urged me to earn royalties on this slide. So I haven't set up that arrangement yet, but I look forward to doing it soon. And my colleagues at Aspen have contributed enormously to this. So what I'm going to try to do is just walk through in a very basic sense, what do we know about Trump accounts and how they work. And I should point out that this was updated just yesterday as Treasury released brand new guidance on what these accounts will look like. So let's start with account establishment. So these accounts are open to newborns who were born 2025 through 2028, as well as to all children under age 18. All right. And that's on a voluntary basis. The child who is the owner of the account must have a social security number. And if they're in the pilot for that 4-year period, they must also be a U.S. citizen. So starting January 1st, families can begin to apply for or claim their Trump account, and they can do that either by filing Form 4547, which just came out yesterday, the draft was. They can file Form 4547 either with or without a tax return, right? So they can file it as a standalone form if they want to, or they can go to a website that is trumpaccounts.gov, which through that portal, starting in about May, families will be able to open up an account without having to file a tax return to claim their account. Treasury will then establish the account at an approved trustee. We don't know who that is yet. Once that happens, the family will then activate the account, and then from there, the account is live. Many of us have advocated for auto enrollment, which we see in the statewide policies that exist. It doesn't look like that's going to happen at the outset, but we are hoping that we can achieve auto enrollment over time starting later this year and make sure that all kids are included. Signa Mary will say more about that. Next column, money in, part of the growth. So you can't make any contributions until July 4th of next year, and that includes the $1,000 from the government if you're in that 4-year pilot period, 2025 to 2028. That money from the federal government for those lucky newborns will be $1,000. Okay, families and other individuals can put up to $5,000 a year in the account, but that's after-tax money. Okay, sort of like a Roth or a 529, it's after-tax money. On top of that, employers can put up to $2,500 per year per employee, and that's either for the dependent of the employee or for the employee, him or herself, if they happen to be under age 18. There is and that $2,500 counts towards the $5,000 overall limit. Most, I think, innovatively, there's something called the general contribution, which allows unlimited, though equal contributions from nonprofits, cities, states, tribal governments, foundations, provided they do so in an area with at least 5,000 kids. Okay, and the geographic area can be a state, it can be something less than a state, it can be the entire country. And many of you probably saw that the Dell family announced a $6.25 billion investment in 25 million kids around the country. They are taking advantage of that provision of the law that allows these outside contributors. The Dell money will go to Treasury, and Treasury will then put the money in the accounts of the eligible kids that they have in mind. Okay, just a couple more columns. Money invested has to be in an eligible investment, which is namely a mutual fund or an ETF that track a qualified index like the S&P 500. Money out doesn't really happen until the child turns 18. And what happens at 18 is the account essentially becomes a traditional IRA, and those rules generally apply. Okay. So what that means is when you take the money out, if it went in pre-tax, like the federal deposit, like the employer money, like the general contribution, if it went in pre-tax, you're going to pay taxes on it when it comes out at whatever tax bracket you happen to be in at an ordinary income rate. You will pay more taxes if you don't use it for what the IRS calls certain exceptions, okay, such as buying a home and going to college and retirement, all right? So that's the way they work. So you won't pay money on the money that was already taxed going in. Like if the family contributed, that money's already been taxed. So you have an account with both pre-tax and post-tax money in it, and it only gets taxed once, either when it's going in or when it's coming out. All right. Now, I mentioned there aren't a lot, you can't really get the money out before 18. However, Treasury envisions that at some point, and they haven't said when, you will be able to roll your Trump account over to a trustee or a financial institution of your choice. The accounts are initially established and held by Treasury, but at some point you should be able to roll them out to a trustee of your choice. Otherwise, there's really no rollovers, with one exception. At age 17, it can be rolled over to an ABLE account. And finally, money remaining. Basically, if you do nothing, the money stays in there and you can use it for retirement or any of the other purposes. The important thing here to understand is that before age 18, the funds in the account do not count against eligibility for food stamps, Medicaid, and other forms of public assistance. But starting at age 18, they will count, okay? But it depends on the program, and there's a lot of rules around which programs count and which ones don't, because the rules governing traditional IRAs would apply to the asset limit rules, and I'm guessing Signa Mary will say a little bit more about that. So let me just close by saying I think this is a down payment again on a really big and exciting idea. It's amazing to have this in law. It's a huge achievement after working on this idea for 20 years. It's great to have it in law, but again, it can and should be improved over time, and I'm pleased to say that there is bipartisan interest in improving them. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ray. As always, excellent information, a great level set for us to continue. And Signa Mary, I'd like to turn to you. You've done extensive research on wealth building strategies, and what we'd like to know is what makes a difference for low and moderate income families, and how do Trump accounts measure up to these best practices?
Yeah, thank you, Benita. So early wealth building programs are a promising solution because they do build on those decades of research evidence. Michael Sherrod, Derek Hamilton, Sandy Darity, Willie Elliott, Trina Shanks, Jin Huang, and other seminal researchers played a key role in conceptualizing and or creating the evidence base for early wealth building accounts. Programs that have been successfully implemented and rigorously evaluated, such as Seed Oklahoma, which Ray mentioned, the Federal Assets for Independence Act, the American Dream Demonstration, they provide the foundation for the evidence. And for early wealth building policies to be most effective in building wealth, it's important that they adhere to the evidence-based principles that the field has agreed on. So in this next slide, principles for early life wealth building, and you can read the details of this publication in the chat. I don't expect you to read them on this page. But what I do want you to see is that the evidence-based principles are the results of the deliberations among policy experts, many of them listed, who have years of experience studying, designing, and testing various forms of wealth building policy. But let's dig into a few of the principles on the next slide. Here I've highlighted 4 key principles that are relevant for 530As. The first 3 are the most important. So Benita, if we run out of time for the 4th, that's okay. And everybody can read about all 4 and others in the publication. So first and most important is universal eligibility. Make all children eligible and enroll them automatically. So universal eligibility means that all children are eligible, and it's really powerful. Like, imagine the opportunities for financial education in schools if every child had a 530A and could learn about investment and know that their country and their community believed in their future opportunity. And automatic enrollment means that all children benefit. Without automatic enrollment, you'll lose over half the population. That's what the evidence says. And it's going to be the half of the population that needs the accounts the most. So, for example, Maine has a universal early wealth building program. When families had to opt into that program, only 40% of eligible children enrolled. And then when the program switched to automatic enrollment, 100% of children were enrolled. And now all babies in Maine benefit from the program. Families with higher incomes have the resources to sign up and take advantage of accounts like these when they're opt-in. And so that's who benefits the most without automatic enrollment. So how do 530As align with this first key principle? Well, they're universal for all children with a Social Security number. So that aligns pretty well, and it's exciting. But not all children receive a federal deposit, and that aligns less well. Only children born in 2025 to 2028 who are part of the pilot receive the $1,000 federal deposit. It's not yet clear whether Treasury will automatically enroll children in 530As. Based on what Ray said, it sounds like not out of the gate, but hopefully we're going to get there within the first year. And evidence suggests that this should be a top priority. For 530As to succeed, take-up is likely going to be an important metric for the program's success. And so automatic enrollment is critical. Ray, what would you add? Anything more about universal or automatic enrollment before we go on to the second one?
You said it very well. Thank you, Signa Mary.
Okay, let's go on to the second principle then, and that is build wealth for low and moderate income families, with the largest benefit going to these families, not to high income families. And this is important because of our country's history of upside down federal wealth building subsidies. Low and moderate income families are typically left out of federal subsidies for wealth building, and they also face savings penalties. So how do 530As align with the principle to focus on low and moderate income children and to provide them the largest benefit? They do not currently align. So all babies in the pilot receive $1,000 regardless of the family's means. Contributions to 530As from families and friends are likely to exacerbate this because the families who are able to contribute the most are going to be those with the most means. And that's something that we've seen in the evidence in these programs. So currently there's no financial progressivity in the deposits. And the only progressivity comes via capital gains rates upon withdrawal. So it's critical that 530As do not become simply another wealth building subsidy to high income families, those who already have wealth. And this is where philanthropic, state, city, and tribal government contributions are critical until 530As themselves can better meet this principle. So philanthropists Michael and Susan Dell's $6.25 billion donation this week aligns with this principle. They focused their large contribution on children in low-income zip codes. So philanthropists and state and local government leaders, if you want to target your resources to ensure they go to low wealth families, one data tool that you could use is Urban Institute's Financial Health and Wealth Dashboard to focus your investment on low wealth local areas. In that dashboard, we estimate median net worth for local areas, for cities, and for states across the country. So it could help you target your resources. Ray, anything you'd want to add here before we go on to the third?
No, please go. Thank you, though.
Okay. So the third key principle I've called out is to exclude early wealth building accounts from asset limits. And that's because these are savings penalties. So many of the safety net programs that families with low incomes participate in, such as food and cash assistance, they're focused on income and keeping families afloat, and they would benefit from a complementary wealth building program like 530A. So these programs, in theory, should go really well together. We need both income and wealth to thrive and prosper. But unfortunately, existing programs penalize savings. For instance, many families won't qualify for SNAP or Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program or temporary assistance for needing families if they have benefits of over $3,000 in their savings. And so this here, Ray, you talked about this a little bit more, or a little bit earlier, and might be good to talk about this a little bit more together on whether the money that's in the 530As from the federal government deposit, from the Dell deposit, whether those deposits could disqualify children from food and income assistance that they may need at critical points in their childhoods.
Well, it won't disqualify them in the growth period between 0 and 18. That's been clarified. And the money's inaccessible anyway, so it makes sense. But it definitely could once the child becomes a young adult at age 18. But there it does depend on the program. And so whatever the rules are governing traditional IRAs would apply. So that's how we have to think about it. And I would just point out that the bills that I'm engaged in on Capitol Hill all include a provision to categorically exclude all savings from consideration in determining means-tested eligibility for means-tested programs.
Okay, so that's good. So I would say then it somewhat aligns, right? From that 0 to 18, we're okay, and after. And I know that the early wealth building principle that the field wrote down here together was that we should exclude calculations for means-tested public benefits and taxation, both while the funds are held by the government and at the time of distribution. Okay, so let's turn to the fourth then, and that is that early wealth building programs should make real investments. And this is a place where I think 530As mostly align. It's pretty impressive. They make a substantial $1,000 initial deposit. They leverage investment growth, and they allow for ongoing deposits from philanthropy, employers, and other sources. I think they would align even better with this principle by making the $1,000 pilot federal initial deposit permanent. Right now, it's just a pilot program. So let's see, that's Ray, anything you would add on this fourth principle?
Well, I know, call for greater investments for low wealth families at birth and beyond that. So what we call progressive deposits, more for the poor. The Booker bill, the Casey bill, many other bills had these provisions. So it's kind of principle two, but also principle four coming together. We need additional investments, and as wonderful as philanthropy is, and I applaud the Dells, nothing makes up for what the federal government can do on this front.
Okay, so that was just four that we talked through, but there is a fuller list, and you can see this fuller list of the principles and also how an earlier version of Trump accounts, as Ray said, they're like moving all the time, but how an earlier vision aligned with all the principles. And that's in a joint Urban Institute, Aspen Institute, and Center for Social Development publication, how Trump accounts measure up to the principles for early wealth building. So hopefully you can find that in your chat. All right, Benita, back to you.
Thank you, Signa Mary. What I'd like to reflect on, I don't want to take us too far afield, but Trump accounts aren't just a program, they're a platform. And I'd like to hear both of your thoughts about how should we be thinking about leveraging this platform to advance additional goals beyond wealth building and moving more families into capital markets. There's some opportunities there, and if you guys could share, that'd be great. Ray, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thank you. It's a great question. Probably top of my list would be the financial education opportunity presented by these accounts. When every kid has an account, which, that's our goal, of course. Boy, just the opportunity to teach financial basics in school, schools and elsewhere is really remarkable. And I would argue too that it's probably more salient when a child has his or her own money to save and invest, watch grow. I think it can be much more effective as well. So both widespread and more effective. So I'm super excited about the opportunity to teach financial basics around these accounts using this platform.
And I'm going to second that. I mean, can you imagine like every child in the country and the financial education opportunity to learn how to be part of the stock market, what that looks like, how to prepare for home ownership or higher education. So it's just hugely, hugely powerful when it's universal. So I think that's one of the big things. And what's terrific about that too is we spoke with young people about what they want in these types of accounts. And you know what the near universal answer was? Is that they want access to financial advising or guidance. They want that financial support and financial education support on using these accounts. So young people are open to it, and this provides a great opportunity. And many states are passing financial education legislation.
Thank you very much. Let's open it up to see if we have any additional questions from the audience. There were two early questions. One was about asset limits, and Ray and Signamary, you both covered that. And there was also a question about whether these accounts would affect inequality, and we touched on that. If there are any additional questions, drop those in the chat. Here's one new one. Where will the accounts sit and who will manage the funds? I think that's a great question.
Well, initially the accounts will sit at the Treasury Department and specifically the trustee that they will engage. We suspect that they're going to start with just one trustee, one large asset manager. We don't know that for sure. We don't know who it is. And they will probably contract that out. And that asset manager will work with a record keeper like a census or Vestwell to sort of help manage the paperwork and the reporting around the accounts. So that's where they'll start. I don't think that's where they'll end up. It's possible Treasury will choose additional trustees, but I think the more likely scenario is that families, as I mentioned, at some point will have the opportunity to roll their Trump account out to a financial institution of their choice. Okay, and Treasury is going to do something fairly elegant, I think, to make that easy, which is saying that if you as a financial institution are already authorized to offer a traditional IRA, you automatically are authorized to hold a Trump account. So the authorization will be there. It's simply going to be up to the family to do what's called a trustee to trustee transfer, which is a lot of paperwork, but you can do it and then you can roll it over and then you can develop a relationship with your own financial institution. That's the goal. And it's not clear when that will happen, but they have stated that they want that to happen.
And just to add on about the question about what will these accounts do to wealth inequality, Urban Institute has used our micro-simulation models like Dynasim to model out the effects of, in this case, a federal baby bonds program. And we're working on 530As now. And what we found with a federal baby bonds program is that they would increase wealth for all Americans, and they would reduce the racial and ethnic wealth gap. I think as currently designed, 530As could exacerbate wealth inequality unless we get a lot more, contributions that focus on low and moderate income families, because right now the accounts themselves aren't progressive. But I think there's opportunities in the future on this platform to reduce wealth inequality if we do provide larger deposits to families with low and moderate income.
I'd love to just add a little bit to that. Thank you. I agree with Signamary. The potential for Trump accounts to exacerbate wealth inequality is very real. We do need universal automatic enrollment. We do need progressive deposits. We need a categorical disregard of any savings from determining eligibility for means tested programs. Having said that, if we succeed on these fronts, and these policies generally do get better over time, if history is any guide, whether looking at the ACA or Social Security, we really can get to the point where, in fact, you do broaden asset ownership and you do not increase wealth inequality. I would like to point out that the bottom half of the population now only owns 2.5% of the nation's wealth and only 1% of stocks and bonds. That's hardly anything, right? Um, and yet it turns out that there's a new research paper showing that the stock market is now the largest contributor to the racial wealth gap. Like who's in and who's not in the stock market is now largely driving the racial wealth gap. And the paper showed that a full 1/4 of the racial wealth gap can be explained by who is and who is not in the stock market. So if we succeed in getting low wealth households into the stock market, we can not only reduce inequality and grow the wealth from the bottom, but there's a potential to reduce the racial wealth gap as well.
Thank you, Ray. What do we know about why they made this a traditional IRA? Why this vehicle and why not a 529?
Despite Senator Casey's best efforts to expand the field on 529s, the policymakers chose the IRA, traditional IRA, not a Roth. And I think there's a lot of benefits to that. It is already a lifelong savings and investment product. We can do tons of things with that product. You can argue too that in many ways it's better than a 529, not the tax treatment. I think the tax treatment of 529s is better than a traditional IRA. However, young adults are going to have more options with a traditional IRA than they would with a 529. You basically can use a traditional IRA for anything you want. It's just that the tax consequences vary depending on what you use it for. If you use it for traditional asset building purposes, buying a home, college, retirement, you pay fewer taxes than you would if you don't use it for those things, like if you blow it on a vacation or buy a car or whatever, right? So I think there's that benefit as well. And not all kids are meant for college. And I think many families might choose to go with the Trump account, not only because of the multiple streams of investors, but because it gives more options. I think, we didn't choose the traditional IRA, but I think there's a lot of benefits to it. The last one that I would mention is that starting in 2027, something called the Federal Savers Match will go into effect. This is a progressive, refundable savers match for low-income folks who save for retirement, and traditional IRAs qualify for the savers match. So that is a source of progressive deposits. It's already in law and will go into effect in 2027. So again, we didn't choose the traditional IRA, but we think it does prevent all kinds of opportunities for wealth building across the life course.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ray. We have about 2 minutes left, so 2 lightning rounds here. First question, Ray, you've talked about various ways we could improve upon the law as it currently sits. If both of you could wave your magic wand and make one change, what's the change you want to see happen?
I would say that at the end of the first year, it would be automatic enrollment so that all children benefit. And by the 5th year, for sure, that it becomes more progressive so that low and moderate income families benefit the most.
I would agree with those. I think we may need legislation to mandate automatic account enrollment. Right now, Treasury has the authority, but they have chosen not to exercise it for good reasons. It's just something they're very unfamiliar with, and they're familiar with the tax return. Keep in mind that Maine started, as Signa Mary mentioned, as opt-in and switched to opt-out, and that was successful. And let's hope we can have similar success. So I don't know if we have to wave a magic wand. We have members of Congress on the right and left lining up to say, great down payment, let's make these better over time. It will include a provision for automatic enrollment if necessary, federal deposits, continuing the $1,000 beyond the 4-year pilot, and the exclusion of savings from determining means-tested program eligibility for means-tested programs.
And those sound like excellent success metrics. So I'd like to thank both of you for participating and helping level set on what Trump accounts are. And I will turn it over to Jason to continue the conversation.
Great. Thanks so much, Benita. Hello, everybody. If you're with us, you're here for the webinar, How Can Trump Accounts Build Wealth for Low and Moderate Income Households? Incredible panel. We are in the unenviable position of having followed a panel of legends. So Matt and I will do our best. This is a conversation with Invest America's Executive Director, Matt Lira. I'm Jason Ewas, Associate Director of Early Wealth Building at the Aspen Institute Financial Security Program. Honored to have everybody here on the virtual stage, and particularly excited for the conversation with Matt. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's an exciting time, and thank you for pulling this group together. It's an honor to be on the agenda.
Of course, unlike our previous panel, who go back decades, you and I met last year. I think we hosted an event with Invest America on then a yet to be released proposal for Invest America accounts. We had Kevin Hassett and Robert Shapiro on the stage, and a lot has happened since then. So I think we're going to dive right into it. I think first, just want to ask you what your role is in this space, what brings you to this topic and this idea, and then broader than that, what has Invest America done to get this policy to this point, and what do you see as its role moving forward?
Yeah, so maybe essentially, I think I'll start with the last part. Invest America was created almost as an SPV, to borrow a phrase from finance, because there was this incredible body of work around this idea. And to be clear, this was started, Invest America was formed in 2023, so it was well prior to the election, the last election. And the sense was, this is such an incredible bipartisan idea. There are incredible stakeholders who've done programs at the state level and in the academic community and in the philanthropic community. And it felt like there needed to be a place that was free of all baggage, whether it's political or other issues they work on. It could just be a convening point to have a fresh conversation about the issue. And so, created the organization to really, at first, create a central point of knowledge and build on all the incredible research that had been done for at least 4 decades into this issue area, and create a bipartisan sense of authoritative truth, which unfortunately these days is harder to come by than it should be. And Aspen played an incredible role in helping to develop and platform that bipartisan sense of truth with the panel that Ray moderated expertly just about a year ago with Kevin Hassett and Rob Shapiro. And then ultimately it was about, how do we build a coalition that can effectuate this issue area, advance financial literacy, create greater opportunity economically, and close the wealth gap. And to that extent, maybe to get the second part of your question, it's really more of a means to an ends. I think that we view this policy as an incredible tool or platform to effectuate the ends that I think everyone on this call seeks, which are those that I just outlined. And if all that's ever achieved from the accounts is the $1,000 goes out and some philanthropic money goes, that will be a huge success for the country. But what we're classifying as our ultimate success is the creation and catalyzation of that ecosystem, where you have robust philanthropic contributions, you have state, local, tribal governments contributing to the accounts consistent with their priorities, and that you have interactions with philanthropic programming across the board on financial literacy programs and creating stipends for kids who complete financial literacy classes. And there's no legal restriction. It doesn't have to only be for financial literacy. You could see a world in which contributions to the accounts can come for finishing a fitness course or for completing some academic milestone. And last but not least, creating a mechanism that solves the cold start problem, which has been touched on earlier in this call. One of the reasons I believe that the other incredible programs have not had the uptake that we would want in LMI households is because it is intimidating to create a custodial trust from scratch, even if you're from an upper income household. And this takes that and makes it incredibly easy to do. Like I think everyone else on this call, we champion automatic enrollment. And if we don't get it on day one, we'll continue to research and advocate for it. But absent auto enrollment, the fact that you're essentially making that a one form process that from a trusted source, the U.S. government, I think will be game changing for giving LMI households an on-ramp to improving their financial behaviors. So anyway, just tremendously excited about all the progress that's been made and excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And you answered a lot of my other questions. So we'll weave back to those. I think noted the point on automatic enrollment. We'll circle back there shortly. I think I wanted to ask, as any good question must, I'm gonna have a preamble to this, but the question will be simple on the goal of Trump accounts. And I first want to acknowledge some tension. Some people think we did this policy and we correct them every time. We are not in fact in charge. But we think we have some role to play. We hear a lot of tension from some concerns from folks. The idea, as Signamary and Ray and Benita outlined, has a long bipartisan history, right? Deeply research informed. This bill, however, HR 1, was by definition partisan, right? Include elements that as Ida mentioned at the front, will hit folks' financial security potentially in other ways. So people we talk to, people don't understand kind of where the idea came from, and what the objectives are. Just to name it, some may be suspicious of the motives. The last thing I'll say is to be in particular. So the connection to HR 1, how this, if it plays into sort of Social Security, some kind of long, particularly in relation to the Treasury Secretary's comments. And then how it will impact asset limits. So that was my preamble, how it connects to HR 1, Social Security, and asset limits. And my question is, Matt, what is the goal of Trump accounts? You gave a vision, but what's the object? What does success look like at the end?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm completely sympathetic to people who, given this partisan age that we live in, that are suspicious or at least concerned about any sort of partisan motives. Anytime you're dealing with political figures, there's always going to be potentially an element of that from certain stakeholders. But I do ultimately think each of us has therefore a choice, sort of say, are we going to feed that ecosystem, or are we going to feed the ecosystem, at least that I would like to see, and I think many people like to see, of solutions, evidence-oriented progress. And to that end, I think the accounts represent an incredibly genuine opportunity to achieve that progress around the country. From our perspective, the success of the accounts is what's along the lines of what I touched on earlier, which is as a catalytic event to create this ecosystem that dramatically improves the financial literacy of households around the country by changing their behaviors to make smarter financial decisions, therefore creating more empowerment and agency in their lives. And the iPhone is a great product, but what makes it magical are the apps. And I think if the defining success of this will be far more than a government web form or even the account deposit initially, but the ecosystem around it, ideally tying into curriculum, tying into employer benefits, and tying into massive philanthropic activity, primarily aimed at the benefit to LMI households. It has the potential to be one of the most effectively progressive, and I mean that in a nonpartisan way, policies in the history of the country, a revitalization of our nation's social contract. So many things in our nation's social contract are about how we end our lives, and as well, we should take care of that. But this is very firmly about how we begin our lives, and giving people that sense of agency over their own destiny is a fundamentally empowering act. And one of the things that was heartening about the reaction this week from a lot of entrepreneurs, which obviously is where we, like Invest America, interface with a lot of folks in the business community, is that they all had their own stories of, for Michael Dell, it was literally $1,000 that he was able to cobble together to start Dell Computing. Or I saw Mr. Beast tweeted out, he's a YouTuber for those who aren't familiar with the latest digital YouTube fads, but he was saying he cobbled together a little bit of money to buy a computer and a camera. And those are extreme examples, of course, but the principle is the same, which is having the sense of agency, the feeling of empowerment over your life, and having the on-ramp to get through that technical barrier. I think some of the research, which was sponsored by people on this call, spoke about the idea of financial scaffolding around mainstream institutions, and it created an on-ramp for people to get into the mainstream financial system and continue to scale that success over time. For what it's worth, I think the secretary's point, which he clarified, was about that the lifelong financial habits are going to, of course, make people's retirement more secure, because they'll be making smarter financial decisions for the rest of their lives. I don't think this program is intended, or nor is it equipped to do that. But you do think about a world in which every 18-year-old has experienced the long-term effects of compounding personally. It's not a theoretical exercise. It's hard to explain even to people who are well educated in the topic. But every 18-year-old in the country has experienced compounding firsthand as they enter the workforce, as they enter their academic journey, and are able to make different choices than Americans are making today. And I think that will be fundamentally profound, far more than the dollar amounts involved.
Yeah. So I think, is it fair for me to summarize that as like you're positioning this, or the goal is to be additive to exist within existing systems, particularly as it relates to like.
Yeah, I would go beyond even additive. I would say harmonious. I actually think that, the incredible work of the 529 community, of which some of the pioneers of the 529 community who I know have dialed in are mentors of mine, even before this work. So have a very deep personal appreciation for all the programs of this kind and the others that may come in the future. I think very specifically what makes this one unique is its universality. And some of this was going to have to move from theory to execution, but the universality, the fact that there is no, there are very few arbitrary delineations about who's eligible for these accounts in this country. And therefore, they become this like universal platform for children to use. As Ray touched on, 529s are incredible, but not everyone is going to intend to use the funds for those purposes. And as much as I do love the 529s, unfortunately, they've been disproportionately benefiting certain cohorts in the population. So again, success for this is very much focused on the LMI.
Yeah.
Though I think it's important to be universal, because if you want it to be in curriculum, if you want it to be an employer benefit, it's a heck of a lot easier to do those things when you know that every kid working for your company or every kid in your school can have an account. And so that universality, I think, is important for this particular program in ways that may not apply to every gift or benefit offered around the program, as the Dells themselves, I think, have modeled this week.
Yep. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think sort of to sort of squarely pivot to the LMI perspective. So how this account can work for low and moderate income households. You mentioned like getting everybody in the accounts, and you mentioned automatic enrollment, support for automatic enrollment. I think what I don't know if folks were up reading the IRS guidance like some of us were, but that at least initially that is not going to be the way that rolls out as the IRS has articulated it. I think, but the weight of the research is clear, and Signa Mary and Ray did a great job showing that. I know I'm not asking for free advice here, Matt, but if the goal is automatic enrollment over time, how do we get there? Like, what would you recommend? And again, which is important because we know from research that particularly folks from low to moderate income households are less likely to open these accounts. And to get to reap all of the benefits that we're talking about here, that these accounts can have, people need to have the accounts. There needs to be money in them, and so that's so just to drive on that. So any advice or thinking you have would be helpful for us and for the audience.
Yeah, I think for on two tracks. The first is we're not starting at zero, in large part due to the work of stakeholders on this call, robust support for auto enrollment at a philosophical level. I don't think there are any major stakeholders who are against it in principle. I think it's not my job to speak for Treasury, but I don't think that they're against it in principle. I think that they're just worried. They want to make sure that the execution of it and the mechanics of it and the technical concerns of it, are feasible as they roll it out. And it's entirely possible that they would roadmap auto enrollment themselves. I don't know that for sure. I'm just saying it's entirely possible. When you speak with them, they don't say that they hate the idea. The policymakers on the Hill, passionately and supportive of auto enrollment on a bipartisan basis. Senator Cruz has spoken about this publicly. Senator Booker put out a great video yesterday on his social channels highlighting his support for auto enrollment. So the point being, we're not starting from zero. I think it's incredibly likely that there will be policy changes to effectuate that if it doesn't happen on its own momentum. The second aspect, though, is that both for auto enrollment and I think for the rest of all the other reforms that have been touched on in the earlier panel, the more successful the adoption of that ecosystem is, the more likely it is that there'll be the momentum to do these additional reforms. Most of the great, what I would call assistance or assistance programs in our social contract did not start as they finished. I mean, as though there are many experts on this call, so firsthand the evolutionary nature of the CTC, the evolutionary nature of I think the Al Fund Foundation's work in Maine was mentioned, and how they did not start at auto and they achieved auto. So I'm actually fairly optimistic from a policy and implementation perspective that the trend line here will go closer towards the ideal as defined by the evidence. But the more successful we are with what we have, the more likely it is, I think, that there'll be desire to spend the time, energy, and effort to do the things that we think should be added.
Great. And so on that, I think there's large scale participation through whatever mechanisms that get people into the accounts, right? It is critical it's the foundation of success for the government, for any metrics they have, for asset managers, and for families and kids, obviously. Like, curious about any plans or emerging plans to increase awareness among LMI communities and try to drive uptake.
Yeah, so a couple things there. I think first, we're very, and this touches maybe on what you said earlier, we're very purposely trying to overtly find bipartisan ways to highlight this program and the success inside the broader policy discussion. And I want to give credit, because he's been very vocal this week, to Senator Cory Booker and his team, who have really no political incentive to speak out in support of the initiative this week, given the branding, and yet have done so in writing and have done so very visibly. And I think that speaks to a commitment to the issue and inspires me, and I hope it inspires others. The second is, as it relates to the public at large, we're going to be working on some fairly meaningful, hopefully, public service campaigns to try to build awareness around the accounts, both on the need to sign up, but also on the need or the opportunity to enhance your financial literacy and all the other benefits that we talked on. And I think with this particular lens at LMI audiences, and so we're working with some incredible people on which messengers, stakeholders, platforms are the most likely to reach those audiences effectively. We're not sort of resting on our laurels about that, I guess. And ultimately, proof will be in the pudding, and I hope that we can defy the odds and deliver some meaningful uptake inside the whole country, but particularly inside the LMI communities. And for me, I was inspired this whole process by some of the work that had been done in Virginia around the school breakfast program. I think Aspen maybe did a great research paper on this in another part of your organization, but effectively by making it universal, the school breakfasts were destigmatized, and students and parents were far more likely to actually sign up for the programs. And so the adoption rate inside Virginia just went through the roof, and when it became a universal rather than a segmented benefit. And so in the spirit of evidence-based policymaking, it really inspired me about the transformative power of making something universal for all children. And sure, there'll be some high net worth families that are able to take full advantage of some of the tax treatment kind of as part of that. But I think on balance, if we're successful, the transformative impact for LMI families of having the sense of empowerment, having the on-ramp to get over the cold start problem, and then hopefully having this broader ecosystem to improve financial literacy, change financial behaviors early in life, will be far worth the the whatever side benefit one or two families get on the other side of that. So at least that's our view, and we're really excited about working with everyone we can to help make that a reality.
Yeah, I appreciate you naming sort of what you see as the trade-offs there, and a lot of the questions coming in the chat. There wasn't formally an audience Q&A as a part of this, but they're coming and I'm looking at them. Was on that, and so I think we've only got a few minutes left, so I won't have time to dive in. So we're before a panel on the role or potential role of philanthropy in advancing Trump accounts. Ray gave the full overview, as he always does, of the different types of organizations that can contribute. And obviously there's the big Dell gift yesterday. Curious your vision for how external organizations can contribute to accounts, particularly to drive contributions for LMI households. What do you see on the horizon? Who do you think needs to be activated to really make that happen and make the policy all that it can be?
Yeah, I think that there's two, and hopefully there are things that we can envision in the spirit of any great platform. I don't think the people, not to go back to the analogy, but the people who built the iPhone probably didn't think about Uber. And so I'm excited to see the innovation that occurs on top of this platform that we can't anticipate. That said, I think there are two primary areas for philanthropy that we're excited to hear more about. The first is in the Dell model, the philanthropic assistant facilitated by Treasury. It's just a new mechanism that didn't previously exist. If Dell had previously wanted to send out funds to recipients at that scale, they would have had to spend enormous resource identifying recipients and getting their account information and validating their IDs, whereas now he's able to leverage this federal infrastructure to essentially transfer the money directly and not have to do all that diligence work. And it's a far more efficient use of the funds. And that's an opportunity that exists for philanthropists across the board. And they don't all have to be $6.25 billion gifts. I think that you could envision a world in which states and cities have sponsors in the way of the Al Fund Foundation that are specific to their communities. And so a robust map of that kind of Treasury facilitated philanthropy, I think, is one category. The second is through programming. And I feel very strongly about this personally, that you have now the opportunity, just a direct relationship between a philanthropic program and a recipient, where they have the ability to sort of say, sign up for this, and whether it's completing a course or reaching a milestone or just direct assistance without involving the Treasury, all those options now exist on this platform. And I'm very excited to see what the philanthropic community is able to do with that. And I think, again, given the universality, it creates enormous potential particularly for LMI households, to get to tie into objectives that are far afield of financial literacy.
Yeah. Okay, seeing a few minutes left, we won't have, again, I wish we could fill up about 2 hours ourselves. I feel like asking these questions. I'll just name some of the things in the chat. People really pushing on sort of trying to figure out why we didn't get automatic enrollment from the start. I think that point, we talked a fair bit about it. I think concerns about the policy not getting there. So just to name that, and people had concerns about that they may exclude disabled children, or how these interact with able accounts as well. On either of those, we'll give you a quick response, and then I'll conclude with one question. Anything you on those? That
well, I think obviously I don't speak for Treasury, but every indication we've had is that it's not opposition. It's just about on-ramping. And if that ends up not being the case, I think we have the opportunity to engage as a community to get where we want to go. The fact that our nation's leaders in the Senate are already thinking that way for me feels like a layup. So, not to be overly optimistic, I think in 5 years, this program will either be automatic enrollment or it won't exist, sort of one or the other. I think it's either going to be successful enough where it creates auto enrollment on its own momentum, or it won't. And so that's just my view, obviously. But I think it makes me very excited, and in the spirit of the other assistance programs we touched on, thinking of this as an evolution, rather than as this version is the final version that's always going to be the way it is. I think is a healthy approach. I don't know anything that would indicate discrimination based on a person's able status or not. If there is something along those lines, I'd be very interested in learning more about that, because obviously that's not appropriate, or it would be anyone's goal. Anyway, and I'm excited for the community. I think we live in a highly polarized time. I deal with it as much as anyone. And again, I think each of us have things that we love and don't love about every decision on every day. But in those moments, I think it's important to find the things that can work and make them work. One, because you have the ability to improve the world, but two, you have a way to model just a better way for us to engage in our civic life. And so I've been heartened by this community on this issue space as I've approached the issue. It's been incredibly gratifying to work with you, and I look forward to continuing working with everyone I can to make this program and our bigger mission of the outcomes we're trying to achieve a success.
Really appreciate it, Matt. As always, if only we had more time. But my last question was framing up what success looks like for you in 5 years. You named it. You've done that throughout. Really appreciate you taking the time today. See this as the beginning of a dialogue. Folks can figure out how to reach Invest America or reach out to us if they're so inspired to learn more. But really appreciate your leadership, you taking the time, and look forward to continuing to work together. I will hand it over to Madeline for an exciting panel on the role of philanthropy. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks so much, Jason. If you're just joining us, this webinar is entitled How Can Trump Accounts Build Wealth for Low and Moderate Income Households, hosted by the Urban Institute and the Aspen Institute Financial Security Program. My name is Madeline Brown. I'm a Senior Policy Associate here at Urban, and just so excited to be joined by this wonderful panel today. We know these Trump accounts, these 530A accounts, are launching in this complex policy environment. We've heard about this today. These exist alongside other federal budget decisions that have and will reduce resources in the short term for families. And as Signa Mary said earlier, our federal wealth subsidies sort of largely already go to high income, high net worth families. So I think we know there are these questions about design, inclusion, unintended consequences that are really grounded in history, and that for this program to really work for low and moderate income families, we have to do things differently than we have done currently with our current tax code, and also existing wealth building programs like 529s. So this panel is really about philanthropy's role, how to engage, what principles should guide that engagement. As we've said, this panel is a timely one this week. Giving Tuesday always brings attention to national giving and the sort of philanthropic sector, but the Dell family's gift certainly adds to that attention. And so we know that there's lots of folks who have sort of recently come to this issue area, and even folks in the philanthropic space who have recently come to this issue area. And so we're really excited to be able to bring Jill and Amit and Benita into this space to share their expertise as folks who have been committed to early wealth building for some time, and in particular thinking about sort of the role of philanthropy in this space. So really excited to have you all on, and would love to just start with a general question and ask each of you to introduce yourselves, as you'll do a better job than I would anyways, and just talk a little bit about sort of your involvement with early wealth building programs. So Jill, you're first on my screen. Maybe you can kick us off.
Terrific. Thank you. And thank you for the honor to be part of this conversation. And just kudos to the other presenters and panelists. It's been so informative. I've been taking lots of notes and learning quickly. So my name is Jill Hawley. I am Chief Impact Officer at Gary Community Ventures. We're a philanthropic social change organization based here in Denver, Colorado. And we're focused on improving outcomes for Colorado kids and families through school readiness, youth success, and family economic mobility, with our big North Star being building wealth for low-income families. Our founder, Sam Gary, gave us a really powerful charge to transfer our assets from our balance sheet to the community's balance sheet by 2035. So this idea of transferring assets in a way that compounds in value over time just brought us very naturally into the early wealth accounts conversation. And we saw it as a powerful tool to address wealth inequalities and build family wealth. As we began investigating this and thinking and learning from all the great work that has been referenced on this call, we were really excited to learn that many of our advocacy partners here in Colorado have been talking about early wealth building accounts and exploring ways that we might be able to advance a statewide policy similar to what Connecticut has done. And so through those early efforts and deeper discussions, including deep discussions with our state treasurer's office, we kept uncovering sort of two key barriers around statewide adoption. And the first was the need for a sustainable funding source to seed the ongoing accounts. It's no surprise to anyone, but that was something that our advocacy partners committed to exploring. And then the second was just some really fundamental questions about the structures to administer the program. What kinds of supports do young people need? How does that look at scale? How do you disperse the funds and manage that disbursement? How do you understand impact so that you can continually improve the program? And those were questions that really philanthropy could help answer through a kind of demonstration project. And so we said we could try this out and pilot an accelerated demonstration project to sort of codify how this could work. And so this January, we're launching a 5-year pilot that provides 100 teams, sophomores and juniors in high schools from Medicaid eligible families with $20,000 seeded in investment accounts. And through digital learning platform, participants and their families will receive financial education designed to build their confidence and their identity as investors. And we're intentionally trying to build it in a way that could be scalable. And at the end of their senior year in high school, the participants can access their funds for wealth building purposes, much of which we've already talked about: higher ed, home ownership, business ventures, retirement. And we've partnered with Impact Charitable as our program administrator and a third-party evaluator so we can document both the process and outcome learnings. And we're excited that a total of 10 national and local funders joined us to do this effort. And it's about a $3 million pilot that we're working to make a reality. And I'll just sort of close with the goal of this pilot is really to demonstrate the power and potential of early wealth building accounts to positively impact the attitudes, behaviors, and economic opportunities for young people, while also answering these important design and implementation questions so that we can support replication at scale. And for us, scale is both a public play, but also a private asset transfer play. Like, how do we make those big private asset transfers effective and become more than deposits, but actually really wealth building pathways? So we're excited to engage more in this conversation. Thanks.
That's great, Jill. Thank you. And just want to underscore $20,000 per teenager is no small thing. So I always love to bring on all of your local programs because sometimes I get into rooms and people don't believe that we're actually moving that kind of money and endowing kids with that kind of sum. So just congratulations on that. Benita, I'm going to go to you next.
Thank you. Really want to thank Aspen and Urban for putting this conversation together. Already learning a lot and excited about the growing community around this idea. So very happy to be a part of this conversation. I introduced myself earlier, but I will say just a little bit more about the foundation. The big thing is that we will be celebrating our 100th anniversary next year. Extremely excited about that. And throughout our history, our work has been guided by the principle of building the capacity for accomplishment, helping individuals and communities achieve their potential and work together to make that happen. And this idea is very much aligned with that principle. To say a little bit about how we've been in this work, I'll go backwards to go forward and think about how we're seeing things in this current moment. But again, we've been in the game for about 30 years, trying to take the bright idea that was words on a page in Michael Sheridan's book and transform that into brighter life prospects for children and their families and the communities that they live in. Our very first grant went to the Center for Social Development at Washington University to enable Dr. Sheridan to take the idea and operationalize it so that it was actually a thing serving families. And since then, we've supported a broad range of initiatives, and I think it shows just how many roles philanthropy can play. I can't go down the whole list, but here's a few, pretty much chronologically. The National Demonstration Project, earlier SEED was brought up, both the community-based SEED and the experimental site, as well as the research, the experimental random assignment control group evaluation research of that effort. We've also supported several exemplary models around the country to show how these programs work and what best practice looks like. Kindergarten to college in San Francisco, the Harold Althon College Challenge in the state of Maine, and the Wabash Promise in Wabash County, Indiana. All of those have helped inform and build knowledge about this field. Technical assistance, these are simple concepts, powerful concepts, something entirely different to put into practice. And so technical assistance to help people do that and to do it well. And by well, I mean in the ways we know that work for low and moderate income families. We've convened learning communities so that we can accelerate the spread of best practices around the country. That's just a few of the examples. I think the point I'm trying to make is that philanthropy has quite a broad toolbox for expanding opportunity and supporting children and families. We're a national foundation, but grant makers of all types, from private to community to corporate, family can play a role. And certainly the incredible role that the Dells made this week, but even small mom and pop businesses and everything in between. So thinking about where we are in this moment, I see a few key areas where philanthropy can make a difference. I echo, highlight, double underline everything everybody's already said about adding contributions for low and moderate income families, really getting more resources into those accounts. I think it's hugely important. And if you want to see a great model of that, New York City Kids Rise program has done a fantastic job of leveraging their community to do just that. Matt spoke earlier about the education and awareness pieces. Believe it or not, maybe it's just because we're in this work, but many people still haven't even heard about Trump accounts, or they've heard of them and they're unsure of whether they apply to them. So I think there's a huge role that we have to do in building awareness and helping families understand this opportunity. There's the marketing and outreach. Awareness is just the first part. We need families to take action. And right now that means opting in. We hope later it will be automatic, but we need families to do something. So Matt talked about what are the messages and the channels to get that out. And I would just say that our outreach has to be very strategic. Some families will need a nudge. Some will need a lot of support, and some in between. The work that different foundations can do and the different touch points they have with families, I think will be really important. There's always room for more research and evaluation. I say that with Aspen and Urban on the call. We'll need to figure out what's working and what's not and why. And that's certainly something philanthropy has done and can continue to do. And making sure what we're learning is well disseminated. This is a national initiative. Every community in the country needs to know how to make this work. The employer engagement piece. Also this week, it was a really busy week, but also Senators Cruz and Booker sent a joint letter to CEOs encouraging businesses to participate. That's something corporate philanthropy can do well to help connect employers and employees to these accounts, which can, as we know, amplify their impact. So I think all of this together, going back to what Matt said about the ecosystem or cross-sector partnerships are going to be essential to make this work. Philanthropy can't do this alone. The government can't, business can't. It's that collaboration with the agencies and nonprofits that's going to be critical. And I think philanthropy is in a key role with our convening abilities to bring those things together.
Thanks so much, Benita. It's super helpful, I think, to hear, those roles that you all have played, but also that philanthropies, state, local, national, have played for decades now in building these pilots, funding the pilots, and the education and awareness. There are so much more. There's so much more than just putting money in accounts that philanthropy has done for a long time, and in large part, I think we. And, I say we as sort of like research policy folks are prepared to talk in this moment because of the way that philanthropy has really been invested in the early wealth building space for so long. And we have learned so much from all of the pilots that we're talking about. So definitely want to continue to talk about convening and TA and evaluation, all of the things that go along any program like this that sort of need to happen in tandem. Matt, would love to turn to you and hear about what brought you to this space and your engagement.
Sure, appreciate it. Good afternoon, good to see everybody. My name is Amit Kanduri. I am with the Georgia Resilience and Opportunity Fund, where I lead our baby bonds work. The Grow Fund runs an accelerated early wealth building program, an accelerated really baby bonds demonstration project called Freedom Futures, which seeks to understand how direct investments in young people can impact their ability to attain financial stability, build wealth, and improve their well-being. This is a 4-year program, and the first cohort of the program serves 50 young people between the ages of 18 and 25. The average young person in the program is 20 years old, has a household income of about $20,000, is both working and enrolled in school, and has a household wealth of $0 or negative dollars. The program has 3 key components. First is that participants will receive a $40,000 quote-unquote baby bond or investable sum, which is set aside for wealth building. This size is intentionally chosen. It's a large enough sum to begin reducing barriers to asset building. So, for example, it's enough to put a 10% down payment on the average home in Metro Atlanta. And it's around the same amount in Senator Booker's federal baby bonds proposal for dollars allocated to those coming from households with the lowest amount of wealth and income. The second component of this program is a $500 a month income support, which is unrestricted, and it's really intended to help recipients meet their basic needs. As was stated earlier, we think wealth building really does require both a steady income and then also a capital foundation for the future. And then the third component of this program is financial education, which includes online financial education via Moneybird and financial advising via Edward Jones. We've got two really key goals with this program. The first is, as stated earlier, to improve the financial stability, wealth, and well-being of participants. The program is structured as a randomized controlled trial with an evaluation led by Doctors William Elliott and Nicholas Sorensen out of the University of Michigan. And then the second key goal, and really relevant to this conversation in particular, is to generate learnings for early wealth building policy proposals like baby bonds, like Trump accounts. As an accelerated program, Freedom Futures will function like a simulation of these policies and is going to likely be amongst the first baby bond type programs to return learnings, given that state programs and even the federal, Trump accounts program will take over 18 years to disperse funds. Learnings generated by Freedom Futures are intended to support further implementation of baby bonds and similar early wealth building policies, both locally and nationally.
Awesome. Thanks, Amit. I'm so excited to dig in a little bit more. I want to there's a couple things that you mentioned, in particular, again, these sums, 40,000, and that it's tied to the actual cost of assets in your area. I think that's something you all have been really vocal and clear about. And as we talk about wanting young adults to use these dollars to go engage in asset building activity, right? I think it's so important that we all keep in mind what those things cost today and our best guess at in the future. And also I think this distinction in your program between sort of providing both a financial education and advising, and that there are different actual providers of those things, just elements that, we know are important, but I want to make sure that our audience is sort of hearing some of those distinctions because I think we talk about financial education a lot, and there are certainly lots of principles that are sort of universal. We want every young adult to come up understanding, but there's also a very different set of guidance that one would need to come into $40,000, no matter who you are. So just naming that there's a universality there too. Awesome. So Jill, this is an event focused on low and moderate income families. Curious, we've heard a little bit about your pilot, but I'm curious, as you all sort of went about the design of that pilot, what kinds of considerations, design elements you all took to make sure that it was a pilot that worked specifically for low and moderate income families?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Well, I think first I would say we've learned that this is a lot harder than we thought. There are really pieces of this work that are structurally quite difficult. As I think was really framed up in the earlier conversations, our current systems just really aren't designed to make wealth building easy for families who aren't already wealthy. And so as a result, we've had to be really intentional about what it looks like in our pilot efforts and eventual policies to design systems that work for low income families. And so in our pilot, this has manifested itself in kind of 4 key ways. The first is starting with trust. For families who have really been burned by systems, trust actually just needs to be a core design feature. And this includes listening to teens and their parents from the very beginning, finding out what they want and need, and really designing to meet those needs. In engaging trusted partners, I think this was also mentioned earlier, but messengers matter. So we're partnering with community-based organizations that families trust. And then kind of the second thing, which I feel like was really nicely discussed earlier too, is make this easy. We really need to find ways to reduce friction to near zero. Lives of low-income families are super complex. There's multiple jobs often, non-traditional schedules, non-traditional household structures. And we have to honor those realities and make enrollment and participation easy. And like in an ideal world, wouldn't it be fun if it was positive and actually hopeful to engage in the enrollment process? So auto-enrolling where possible, we talked a lot about that, and there's a lot of buy-in. But pre-filling forms, minimal documentation, using plain language, using documents families already have, like Medicaid eligibility or school verifications, and allowing multiple ways for families to demonstrate eligibility, and then providing documents in multiple languages and offering live assistance. The third kind of learning or design principle is something that we also spoke a lot about in the prior conversations, and that's protecting public benefits and really doing the best that you can to avoid unintended consequences. And so this is trying to address what we talked about earlier, all the ways our system kind of currently penalizes savings. And so that's asset limits, FAFSA, tax implications. We do think that when you're doing these in more of the public sphere, you might have an easier way to address this in federal and state laws and regs. But in private pilots, it's kind of tricky. You have to figure out workarounds. And we've kind of done that by leveraging tax code related to charitable gifts. But we anticipate that we may uncover more structural barriers or penalties that we'll kind of have to address along the way. And then the fourth piece that I really want to underscore is really turning deposits into wealth pathways. This is where the supports that make the money matter come into play. And these supports may be easier to do in pilots because they're small, but they're essential to build into scaled programs. So we're trying to be intentional, even though we have 100 young people in our pilot, of designing something that a state could implement at scale. And so that looks like digital first financial education that's engaging for teens. We really found it tricky to find ones that were engaging, digital first, meant for young people, and that really focus on strengthening identity as investors and participants in the wealth economy. And then that could also engage families in that financial education and support, having ways for peers to learn together in cohorts to build a sense of belonging and community, and really designing for that spend moment so that there's clear eligible uses, support at decision points, and frictionless disbursement. So my hope kind of as we're trying to put in practice these sort of four things that we see pretty critical in our design is that these accelerated pilots will complement the national efforts by generating some proof points that show both the promise of these accounts for young people, but also the practical supports that are needed before, during, and after disbursement so that we can turn these accounts from what might just be deposits into really durable wealth building pathways.
That's great, Jill. Thanks so much. Just one note on the digital natives piece that I always think is interesting is I think we talk a lot about like reaching the teens, right? Making sure we're reaching them online. If you're looking at a program that's enrolling babies, a lot of the parents are also digital natives, right? So like our whole outreach and engagement strategies, we have to also start with how do we reach people where they are, recognizing sort of our median age of parents here too. So just appreciate that note. It's something we think about a lot. So Amit, would love to talk a little bit about, I think again, we've talked about this is a big week for philanthropy, lots of interest now from folks, and I think folks in the philanthropy space who have not been in the early wealth building journey for very long, and that's great. We welcome all of our newcomers. But you and your team at Grow have recently had to do a big fundraising effort, right? And convince philanthropy to care about this program, to care about early wealth building. So I'd love if you could just talk a little bit about sort of how you frame this when you're talking to philanthropy and what you think is maybe motivating folks to be interested in early wealth building.
Yeah, absolutely. We think there's probably three things funders are finding compelling. First, as has been stated earlier, there is a clear window of opportunity with significant policy momentum around early wealth building at the state and the federal level, with bipartisan support for the concept, whether it's baby bonds, whether it's Trump accounts. What's missing, though, especially on baby bonds, and I would argue also for Trump accounts, are those real world insights that can't be captured through models or projections alone. So things like, what's the impact of providing young people with significant seed capital for wealth building? What financial decisions do young people make when provided with meaningful capital? What other supports do young people need? What are the nuts and bolts for effective implementation? These are the things you can answer. These are the questions you can answer with an accelerated pilot program. The second thing I think that funders are finding important is that our program in particular is designed to provide a model for addressing wealth inequality. Freedom Futures is intended to serve as a demonstration of baby bonds, which simulations show is among the most effective ways to address wealth inequality and also generate broad prosperity. In fact, simulations show that a national universal baby bond program structured much like ours could narrow the racial wealth divide for young people by over 50%. And additionally, our model pairs a $500 a month income support with a $40,000 investable sum for wealth building. And it's unique in this way, in that it really addresses two root causes of wealth inequality, right? Wealth, we think, is a product of today's income and yesterday's wealth. In order to build wealth, you need to be financially stable. You have to be able to meet your basic needs, and you need investable sums. So you need a large amount of money set aside for asset building. So you really do need cash for today and capital for tomorrow. We think learnings from this program can provide insight on how a baby bond type program could be paired with a cash transfer program. So perhaps a child tax credit, for example, as part of a broader suite of family supporting policies that provide people with financial relief today and also the capital foundation for the future. And the third thing we're hearing from funders is, what they think is important is that we need big bets to build durable, innovative solutions, right? Big bets allow us to be proactive, forward-thinking, and really build towards the future we want to see, as opposed to being reactive to harmful policy in this moment.
Yeah, that's great. And appreciate the mention too of the $500 monthly. I think there's lots of questions about how do we make any wealth building program work with income programs and vice versa, right? How do we do both things at the same time, and sort of refusing this choice that I think sometimes happens in public budgets, especially. So want to go to sort of a rapid fire round and dig into Trump accounts a little bit. So the new IRS guidance that came out last night, again, assume that not everybody has read this, but doesn't say that much about sort of how these 5,000, baby minimum districts are going to be figured out within Treasury. So folks who don't know, there's the sort of general contributions piece of this program says that 501c3s, nonprofits can donate to groups of kids so long as there are more than 5,000 kids in that geographic region, or however the sort of group is defined. We're waiting still on a lot of guidance around how that's actually going to work, how those places are going to get targeted. So I would love to hear from all of you just sort of quickly, like we've talked a lot about these pilots that you all have either funded in the past or working on right now. You all, even if you take a national lens, have worked in place. So when we think about local philanthropy, state philanthropy, how do we think about these programs sort of together or not? How are you all thinking about Trump accounts within your own work? And maybe Benita, we can start with you and move down the line.
Yeah, so a couple of quick things. On the general contribution, I just go back and reiterate, New York City Kids Rise has really figured out how to leverage the general contribution. I think they have to figure out how to make it work in the context of the 5,000 kid geographic area that's in the regs, but they have a really good model. The other thing that we are thinking a lot about is the stacking or the layering, or maybe it's best to call it a continuum of approaches. And the example I'd offer up there, I'm on the board at the Harlem Children's Zone. They're doing an initiative called Wealth Builds. It has a baby bond, a CSA, whole bunch of other things, and a traditional scholarship. And I think that's the future that we want to be thinking about driving to is supporting young people early and often. I absolutely loved what Matt said. We think a lot about late in life. Let's think about the beginning and as kids take that journey. And then the last thing I would say that I'm thinking about is we come at this from an education lens. And what we know from the kindergarten to college research that Nick and Willie also did, Amit, is that these accounts, savings, really matters for educational outcomes. K2C increased high school graduation, post-secondary enrollment in the aggregate, and the results were twice double for underrepresented kids. So I think one of the big things is how do we leverage this platform called Trump Accounts to not just deliver wealth building outcomes, but to also think about expanding educational opportunity. These things aren't mutually exclusive. And with the point you made, Madeline, about some grant makers that haven't been in the early wealth building space, this is a phenomenal opportunity for the education grant making field to jump into the water. Come on in, water's warm, it's great.
We're a friendly bunch. All right, Jill, maybe to you. Thanks, Benita.
That, Benita, I love everything you shared, and I really love a lot of the comments that came earlier in the conversation around platforms and infrastructure. We're thinking a lot about Trump Accounts as on-ramps. I want to call out something that I think is powerful about the national conversation that's happening now is that we're normalizing early wealth building as a national idea, and that is really meaningful. I would say when Amit was sharing about the fundraising aspect, we found that there are a lot of mindset shifts that need to happen around thinking about wealth and why wealth matters, who's worthy of wealth, who's deserving. Bootstraps mentality still kind of comes up. I did this, why nobody helped me, all of that. To the degree that both sides of the aisle are talking about this, I think that is so huge, and I'm really excited about it. I think we see Trump Accounts as giving that on-ramp for us to have a starting point in Colorado around our sort of early wealth account statewide play. It gives us the infrastructure to begin. And I think we're really curious about things like, could we advance policy at the state level that provides those additional contributions to support low-income families? Or could we provide things like tax incentives to employers who contribute more to the accounts of the children of their lowest wage workers? There's lots of different ways you could play with policy that creates incentives and opportunities for these to become more progressive. And then, with the enrollment option being connected to tax filing, although I loved hearing that there are ways for folks to do it outside of that process, there may be opportunities within the tax system when people are filing for states to create and then automatically apply contributions to the accounts in the form of tax credits, or families indicating in their tax filing that they want to apply a portion of their tax refund to their accounts. So just finding different ways to leverage and play with this is something that we're kind of excited about. And then I think too, like many, because Colorado has an opt-in 529 savings program that has already some generous matching, but uptake has been quite low. How do we help families understand the different options and make good choices and optimize the wealth potential of the different structures? We just think there's a fun conversation to be had around all of that, and really view Trump Accounts as kind of setting up a universal national on-ramp. And then the focus that states can take is adding progressivity, protections, navigation supports, really so low-income families can use those on-ramps to build wealth.
That's great, Jill. Yeah, I think this idea of using Trump accounts as a starting place to bring people into the conversation and then express to them how we actually reach low-income families and that we've done this before and we know how to do it with other early wealth building pilots. Yeah, all great. Amit?
Yeah, like many folks have said, I think the upshot and the opportunity here is that there's clear bipartisan support for early wealth building. This is good. At Grow, we're thinking about how Trump accounts could open the door for a baby bonds type program at the state level. So, for example, could Trump accounts be used as the plumbing for a baby bonds type model, but a model that seeks to address wealth inequality? Or does the existence of a universal federal program like Trump accounts open the door for a more targeted approach at the state level? So these are questions top of mind. But look, many folks have already pointed out in this call and other papers and other pieces that Trump accounts with this current design does have a structural flaw, right? Trump accounts don't provide progressive deposits to families with less wealth. And evidence from CSAs and 529s show that voluntary savings programs generally benefit families who already have wealth. I mean, higher income households are far more likely to contribute and can contribute more because they have more disposable income to save. Like, even if philanthropy and other institutions contribute on behalf of LMI families, our view is that this is likely to have a minimal impact at best on wealth inequality because of the lack of progressive deposits. If you think about it another way, like even if all families are able to make those maximum contributions, those with existing wealth will still pull further ahead because equal deposits into unequal households will continue to produce unequal outcomes. And this is also top of mind for us.
Yeah. Absolutely. Really appreciate everybody's answers there. We've got about 5 minutes, so I'm going to turn to some of the questions that are coming up in the chat, but really kind of just digging into some of the things we've already touched on. Lots of questions about sort of how we think about long-term investment, short-term needs, right? And I think there's sort of two ways to frame this question. One is, how do we build policy that does both? And the other is, how do we convince people that they should care about wealth? Right. And so we know from research, for example, right, wealth inequality is growing and worse than income inequality. So we can say these things, but it doesn't change the fact that people go to the grocery store and are having to put things back because life is expensive right now. And so would love if, and this is a question for anybody, sort of, both, how do we say to practitioners, policymakers, like we can and have to do both, right? We can't make this false choice. And how do we just keep making sure that wealth is a part of that conversation? And why do you all think it should be?
Well, I think we just say we can and have to do both. I think that's exactly what we need to say. Willie Elliott has done some phenomenal research showing that people need to be able to meet basic needs. They need to be able to eat. They need to be able to pay, for housing, but they also need to be able to dream and believe that they have a future and that future is within reach for them. And so I think both of those things have to happen. And then as it relates to why wealth should be a part of the question, I would just say the decades of research that has been done that shows wealth matters. That income matters and wealth matters as well. They matter in different ways, but wealth is not unimportant. It impacts education, it impacts future economic mobility, it impacts so much. So I think we make the research a bit more accessible, more for the lay readers, and make sure we're getting that out there that we need both income and assets. It's not an either or.
Thanks, Vanita. Anything to add? Anybody else? There's another good question in the chat, so maybe we move to that. A great question about, we've talked a lot about sort of building this ecosystem, and in particular, Jill, you talked about sort of trust building, right? Messengers matter. So would love, there's a question about sort of who are the community organizations that can actually reach low and moderate income households and that are trusted. And so maybe just some examples of, if we're in this opt-in environment with these Trump accounts right now, who are some of the orgs that you all would think about turning to help us with some of this messaging?
Yeah, I'm happy to share. We have been thinking about combinations of organizations and places where families are often go. But for instance, schools and connecting with organizations that work and interface with families within a school system or early childhood centers, but also community-based organizations. In some of our communities, we have very trusted organizations that are run by people from the community that speak the language of the community, that have built that trust. This also includes folks who help navigate and support tax filing, free tax filing for families. So tapping into, really, it is unique to each community, but finding those trusted community organizations and leaders who you can tap into to ensure that information about these accounts are being shared with families.
Awesome. I would also just throw in the financial institutions, credit unions. We need you all on this journey with us, and we need you creating products beyond just any savings accounts. We need high quality, low fee transaction accounts, personal loan products, all of those things too along this journey with us. I mean, anything you would add?
I was just going to say, don't forget cities. Cities have played an incredible role. A lot of cities have financial empowerment offices that are doing this work, so don't forget them.
Absolutely. Thanks, Vanita. Anything on either of those questions that you would add before I wrap us up?
Nope, I think it's all been said. Yeah. But maybe the one additional piece on sort of trusted messengers are there young people in groups that serve young people, like their educational institutions, and also groups that serve parents as well are our trusted messengers.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. This has been a wonderful panel, but also just set of expertise on this call today. So I just want to say a thank you to all of our speakers and panelists today, to the team at Aspen FSP for your collaboration on this event. And as we heard historically, in this moment, we really know we need to work together to make this program and all of these early wealth building programs work for the families that we care about, for our low and moderate income families, to make sure that we are really setting people on a path towards wealth building and not just serving our sort of high income, high wealth families. So just thank you all to our attendees today, all of you out there. Thank you for being part of this conversation. We know this is just the start. Please reach out. Let us know what you thought about this event, what other questions you have. Thank you again to the Annie Casey Foundation for letting us do this. And please stay in touch and have a wonderful day and weekend.